My wife just told a judge she deserved 14 million of my dollars because she built my life. I'm sitting in my truck outside the courthouse in Fort Collins thinking about the beat-up Chevy I started with 25 years ago. The only thing Brooke ever built was a shopping habit. My name is Derek Cameron. I'm 49 years old, and I just watched my wife of 23 years tell a judge she deserved half of everything I'd worked for. 14 million in cash, 50% of Cameron construction, and the lake house my grandfather built with his own hands on Lake Granby. When you've been swinging a hammer for 25 years, you learn to spot trouble before it hits. But somehow I missed the biggest con job of my life happening right under my nose. Brooke had always been smooth with words. That's how she hooked me back in college when I was a broke kid from rural Colorado, working 3 jobs to pay for engineering classes. She was studying journalism then, had this way of making everything sound reasonable, but sitting there watching her lawyer paint me as some deadbeat who'd stumbled into wealth, I knew I'd been played. 23 years of marriage, and she talked about me like I was a stranger. Here's the thing though, I'd been feeling this coming for months. Little things that didn't add up. The way she started asking detailed questions about business finances, how she insisted on updating our insurance policies last spring, the sudden interest in my daily schedule. I caught her going through my desk drawer 2 weeks ago. She claimed she was looking for stamps, but I keep those in the kitchen. When I asked what she really needed, she got that look. The one that said I was being paranoid and controlling. That night, I started paying closer attention. Phone calls that stopped when I walked into the room. Bills for lunches at expensive restaurants with college friends I'd never met. A sudden interest in our financial statements and insurance policies she'd never cared about before. The signs were all there if I'd been smart enough to read them. My lawyer, Carl Andrews, had warned me this day might come ugly. Carl's handled my business contracts for 15 years, knew Brooke well enough to see through her act. He pulled me aside after our first consultation and said something that stuck. Derek, when someone starts planning a divorce this carefully, they've been thinking about it longer than you realize. Now, watching her walk out of the courthouse with her attorney, I understood what he meant. This wasn't about growing apart or irreconcilable differences. This was calculated. She wanted to take everything I'd built and leave me with nothing. Brooke climbed into her silver Lexus, the one I'd bought her last Christmas, and drove away without looking back. She had no idea what was waiting for her in that manila folder sitting on my passenger seat. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess really started. I built Cameron Construction from nothing. Started right out of college with that beat-up Chevy pickup and a toolbox my dad gave me. Brooke was there from the beginning, or at least I thought she was. She'd bring me coffee on job sites, help me organize invoices at our kitchen table, pose for pictures when we landed our first big commercial contract. Those early years were tough. I was doing everything myself, framing, electrical, plumbing, whatever it took to get the job done. Worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. My hands were always cut up, my back was killing me, but I was building something. Every house we finished, every satisfied customer, every check that cleared, it all meant we were moving forward. Brooke seemed proud of what we were building together back then. She'd tell her friends how I'd started with nothing and worked my way up. Small residential jobs turned into custom homes, then multi-unit developments. When we landed the contract to build the new medical center in downtown Fort Collins, she threw a party and made sure everyone knew her husband was the man behind Cameron Construction. But somewhere along the way, things changed. I was too busy growing the business to notice when she stopped asking about projects or celebrating our wins. Too focused on providing for our future to see that she'd started viewing my success differently. We never had kids. That's something I'll always regret. Brooke said she wasn't ready, then later claimed the business took up too much of my time for us to be proper parents. I bought into that excuse for years, thinking maybe when things slowed down, when we had more money saved up, when the business was more established. But there was always another project, another contract, another reason to wait. Looking back, I think she never wanted kids because kids would have complicated her exit strategy. Hard to walk away from a family. Easier to walk away from just a husband. My parents died within 2 years of each other when I was in my early 40s. Dad had a heart attack working in his garden, and Mom followed 6 months later. Doctor said it was her heart too, but I knew better. She just couldn't bear to be without him after 45 years together. They left me the lake house and 40 acres on Lake Granby. That land had been in our family since the 1940s when my grandfather bought it for next to nothing and built a cabin with his own hands. Over the years, Dad expanded it, winterized it, turned it into a real family retreat. The day after the funeral, Brooke started talking about selling it. Said it was too far from town, Too much maintenance for a vacation place we barely used. I told her no way. That land meant something to me, represented where I came from and what my family had built. She stopped bringing it up after that conversation, but I caught her looking at real estate listings for lakefront property, calculating what our place might be worth. Should have been my first warning sign. The real warning signs started showing up about 18 months ago. Phone calls that ended when I walked into the room. Sudden interest in our insurance policies. Questions about business finances she'd never cared about before. But the big one was when I found that business card in her purse. Private investigator. When I asked her about it, she had this story ready about picking it up for a friend who suspected her husband of cheating. But the card had notes on the back in Brooke's handwriting. My daily schedule, the office address, questions about asset searches. That night I called Carl Andrews. Told him to prepare for the worst. Carl's one of the good ones. Been handling my business legal work since the early days. Watched our marriage from the outside. Knew Brooke socially. His exact words were, "Derek, get your house in order." This feels like a setup. I should have listened to my gut sooner. In construction, you learn to trust your instincts. If something doesn't look right, doesn't feel solid, you stop and figure out what's wrong before you keep building. But in marriage, I guess I wanted to believe everything was fine even when I knew it wasn't. The divorce papers showed up on a Tuesday morning. Process server looked like he'd rather be anywhere else when he handed them over. Brooke had moved out the weekend before, claiming she needed space to think. Took her clothes, her jewelry, and that silver Lexus. Left behind 23 years like it was a rental agreement she'd decided not to renew. I sat at my kitchen table reading through what her lawyer had put together and realized just how screwed I was supposed to be. She wasn't asking for half of everything. She was demanding specific pieces of my life, calculated down to the dollar. $14 million in cash and assets, 50% ownership of Cameron Construction, the lake house and all 40 acres of family land, spousal support of $15,000 a month for 10 years, even the rights to use the Cameron name for her planned interior design business. You want to know what really got me? The timeline. According to the legal filing, she'd been planning this for 8 months. 8 months of sitting across from me at dinner, sleeping in the same bed, pretending we were working through our problems while she went through all my stuff with a fine-tooth comb. I called Carl immediately. She wants everything, I told him. I know. Got a copy this morning. Derek, this isn't a normal divorce proceeding. This is a hostile takeover dressed up as marriage dissolution. What are my options? Limited if we play by their rules. But there might be another way. That afternoon, I drove out to the lake house. Sat on the dock my grandfather built, looking out at water that had been in my family for 3 generations. Brooke never understood why this place mattered to me. To her, it was just real estate with a nice view. I thought about the early years when we'd drive up here on weekends and she'd actually seem happy. Before the business took off, before money became the measure of everything. There had been a time when Brooke Cameron was the woman I wanted to spend my life with. But that woman was gone. Replaced by someone who saw my success as something she was entitled to rather than something we'd built together. I made 2 phone calls from that dock. First was to my accountant, telling him to freeze access to all our joint accounts pending the divorce proceedings. Second was to a private investigator Carl had recommended, former police detective named Linda Carter who specialized in financial fraud cases. If Brooke wanted to play hardball, I'd give her a game she'd never forget. Here's where things get interesting. I filed my counter-response 2 weeks later. Carl had crafted it carefully. We weren't just defending against Brooke's demands. We were questioning the basis for them. How had she calculated the value of my business? Where had she gotten the financial records she'd cited? Who had helped her assess the worth of private assets that weren't part of our joint property? Brooke's reaction was fast and nasty. Within 24 hours, I got served with a restraining order claiming I'd been threatening her. According to her sworn statement, I'd followed her to her new apartment, sent intimidating text messages, made verbal threats about what would happen if she proceeded with the divorce. Complete bullshit. I had her phone records to prove it. No threatening messages, no contact at all since she'd moved out. But the restraining order meant I couldn't approach her, couldn't contact her directly, and made me look like an unstable, controlling husband to anyone who didn't know the facts. The local newspaper picked up the story. Prominent businessman served with restraining order in contentious divorce. Brooke had fed them just enough information to make me look bad without mentioning her $14 million shakedown or the suspicious timing of her legal preparations. My business started feeling the heat immediately. 2 potential clients called to postpone meetings. The bank that handled our construction loans wanted additional documentation for a project we'd already been approved for. Nothing they could be sued for, but enough to make my life complicated. Carl warned me this was just the beginning. She's trying to isolate you, make you look unreliable and dangerous. Classic strategy. If she can damage your business and reputation, she strengthens her case for maximum financial support. The crazy part is how deep her preparation went. Linda Carter had been working quietly for 10 days when she called with her first report. Mr. Cameron, your wife has been planning this for at least 18 months, not 8. I found evidence of consultation with 3 different divorce attorneys, 2 different private investigators, and a forensic accountant who specializes in business valuations. 18 months. She'd been building a case against me since before my parents died. The timing of this divorce isn't coincidental, Linda continued. She waited until the lake house property was fully transferred to your name, until your business finished its best year on record, until your personal net worth hit its peak. While I'd been grieving my parents and building our future, Brooke had been calculating how to take it all away. There's more, Linda said. She's been secretly recording conversations with you for months. Phone calls, dinner conversations, private discussions about the business. She's got hundreds of hours of audio that she plans to use to prove you're controlling and financially manipulative. Is that legal? In Colorado, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Since she was part of every conversation she recorded, it's admissible in court. That's when it hit me. Every intimate conversation, every private discussion about our future, every moment I thought we were alone, she'd been gathering evidence to use against me. She'd turned our marriage into a surveillance operation. That night, I sat in my empty house thinking about how I wasn't just fighting a divorce proceeding. I was fighting a woman who'd spent nearly 2 years documenting my life, studying my weaknesses, building a legal case designed to destroy everything I'd worked for. But Linda had found something else, something Brooke didn't know about. Mr. Cameron, there's one more thing. Your wife has been meeting regularly with someone you know. Someone who's been feeding her inside information about your business operations. My blood went cold. Who? Your business partner, Tyler Stone. Now let me tell you about Tyler Stone. He'd been my business partner for 12 years. Commercial architect who joined Cameron Construction when we started bidding on larger projects that required his design expertise. I'd trusted him with company finances, project planning, confidential client information. I'd also trusted him around my wife. Linda's report was thorough and devastating. Tyler had been meeting with Brooke twice a week for the past 6 months, always at small restaurants outside Fort Collins where they were unlikely to be seen by anyone who knew us both. The meeting started as brief coffee conversations but grew into lengthy dinner discussions where Brooke pumped Tyler for detailed information about our business operations. She's been asking him about cash flow, upcoming contracts, equipment valuations, real estate holdings, Linda explained. Your partner's been providing her with information that should be protected by business confidentiality agreements. But it was worse than corporate espionage. Linda had photographed them together, and their body language told a story that went beyond business consultation. Brooke and Tyler weren't just sharing information. They were sharing a bed. How long has this been going on? The business meetings started 6 months ago, but I found evidence of contact going back 14 months. Text messages, phone calls, hotel receipts. Mr. Cameron, your wife has been having an affair with your business partner since before your parents died. The timeline made perfect sense now. Brooke's sudden disinterest in our marriage, her questions about the business, her reluctance to spend time at the lake house. It had all started around the time Tyler began working more closely with our residential development projects. I thought back to company dinners, holiday parties, casual conversations where Tyler had been present. He'd heard me talk about family finances, inheritance plans, my intentions for the lake house. He'd known exactly what Brooke would need to build her divorce case. There's more, Linda continued. I believe they're planning to start a business together after the divorce is finalized. Brooke's interior design company isn't just a side project. It's meant to be a full partnership with Tyler. She gets your money in the divorce settlement, he provides architectural services, and they build a competing business using the client relationships he's developed while working for you. So there it was. My wife and business partner had been screwing me over for months, planning to take everything I'd worked for and start their own thing. The betrayal was complete. I called Carl immediately. When I told him what Linda had discovered, the silence on the phone lasted nearly a minute. Jesus Christ, Derek. This is going to be bad. I know. What do you want to do? I want to beat them at their own game. How? I'd been thinking about that since Linda's call. Brooke and Tyler had spent months building their case against me, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated how well I knew my own business and how carefully I documented everything over the years. They want my financial records? I'll give them financial records. They want to know about business valuations? I'll provide complete transparency. They want to play games with asset assessment? I'll show them how the game really works. Derek, what are you planning? I'm planning to give Brooke exactly what she's asking for. All of it, every single demand she's made. That doesn't make sense. It will. Here's the thing about being in business for 25 years. You learn to plan ahead. The key to everything was a document Brooke had never seen, filed 18 months ago in a safety deposit box she didn't know existed. After my parents died, I'd restructured Cameron Construction to protect it from exactly the kind of legal assault Brooke was mounting. Working with a corporate attorney from Denver, I'd created a complex business structure that separated the company's valuable assets from its operational liability. The Derek Cameron who owned 51% of Cameron Construction was technically just an employee of Cameron Holdings, a Colorado limited liability company that owned the real estate, equipment, and intellectual property that made the construction business valuable. Cameron Holdings was controlled by the Cameron Family Trust, which I'd established using my inheritance from my parents' estate. Brooke could demand half of Derek Cameron's share in Cameron Construction, but that share was only worth about $200,000 in equipment and current contracts. The real value, the land, buildings, heavy machinery, and established client relationships, belonged to entities she had no legal claim to. Tyler had been feeding her information about Cameron Construction's revenue and assets, but he didn't know about the holding company structure because it had been established before he'd been granted access to the financial records. To him, it looked like I owned everything directly, but the real masterstroke was the lake house. 3 months after my parents died, I'd transferred the property to the Cameron Family Trust with a specific provision. It could never be sold or transferred outside the family bloodline. If my marriage ended without children, the property would eventually pass to my cousin's kids in Colorado. Brooke could demand the lake house in the divorce, but I literally didn't have the legal authority to give it to her. The trust documents made that impossible. Linda had helped me gather evidence of Brooke's affair with Tyler, but I wasn't planning to use it for revenge. I was planning to use it for leverage. Here's what's going to happen, I told Carl on the day of the final hearing. I'm going to give Brooke everything she's asking for. $14 million, half of Cameron Construction, spousal support, everything. Derek, you can't afford that. I can't afford not to. When the judge awards her those assets and she tries to collect, she's going to discover that most of what she's been promised doesn't exist in the form she thinks it does. The business she gets half of is worth almost nothing. The cash settlement comes from accounts that are controlled by the trust, not by me personally. What happens then? Then I offer her a choice. She can spend the next 5 years in court trying to break the trust and challenge the business structure, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees with no guarantee of success. Or she can accept a reasonable cash settlement and walk away. How much? $2 million. Enough for her to start over. Not enough to destroy what I've built. Carl was quiet for a moment. What about Tyler? Tyler's partnership agreement has a morality clause. If he's found to have violated his fiduciary duty to the company or engaged in behavior that damages Cameron Construction's reputation, he can be bought out at book value with 30 days' notice. The affair is a violation of his fiduciary duty, since he was sharing confidential business information with someone who intended to use it against the company. Linda has enough evidence to prove that in court. The plan was elegant and brutal. Brooke and Tyler had spent months building a trap for me, but they'd built it using incomplete information. Now they were going to discover what happens when you try to steal something that doesn't belong to the person you're stealing from. Let me tell you about that courtroom scene. Judge Patricia Valdez called our case, and the place was packed. Brooke sat at the plaintiff's table wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was projecting the image of a wronged wife who'd sacrificed everything for her husband's success. Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from Denver named Douglas Wright, presented their case like he was performing Shakespeare. Brooke had built Derek Cameron's life, they argued. She'd supported his business ventures, managed their home, sacrificed her own career ambitions for his success. Now she was entitled to half of everything they'd built together. When Judge Valdez asked if I contested any of Brooke's demands, I surprised everyone in the room. No, Your Honor. I agree to all of them. Brooke's head snapped toward me. Her lawyer looked confused. Even Carl seemed startled. You agree to the $14 million settlement? Judge Valdez asked. Yes, Your Honor. Half ownership of Cameron Construction. Yes, Your Honor. The lake house property. Yes, Your Honor. Brooke was smiling now, probably thinking she'd broken me completely. Tyler, sitting in the gallery behind her, looked smug. They thought they'd won the lottery. Judge Valdez reviewed the terms one more time, then signed the divorce decree. Mr. Cameron, you have 60 days to comply with the property transfers and financial settlements. That's when I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Your Honor, there's one additional document I'd like to submit for the record. I handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Valdez. Inside were the corporate structure documents for Cameron Holdings, the trust paperwork for the family land, and Linda's investigative report documenting Brooke's affair and Tyler's breach of fiduciary duty. Judge Valdez read for several minutes while the courtroom remained silent. Brooke's smile faded as she watched his expression change. Mr. Cameron, the judge said finally, it appears the assets your wife has been awarded may not be accessible in the manner she anticipated. That's correct, Your Honor, but I'm prepared to honor the spirit of the settlement with a revised offer. I turned to face Brooke directly. $2 million cash, and you walk away from everything else. Take it or spend the next 5 years in court. Her face went white. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Brooke's lawyer requested an immediate recess to review the documents I'd submitted. When they returned to the courtroom 30 minutes later, Brooke looked like she'd aged 10 years. Wright's confident demeanor had evaporated completely. Your Honor, Wright said, his voice barely steady, my client would like to accept Mr. Cameron's revised settlement offer. Judge Valdez looked at Brooke. Mrs. Cameron, do you understand that you're accepting $2 million instead of the $14 million previously awarded? Brooke's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. The papers were signed that afternoon. Just like that, it was over. Brooke took her $2 million and disappeared from Fort Collins within a week. I heard later through the grapevine that she'd moved to Seattle, where she tried to start that interior design business with Tyler. It failed within 6 months. Turns out when you build your business plan around stolen money and betrayed trust, things don't work out so well. Tyler's buyout was finalized 3 days after the divorce. Book value for his partnership share came to $87,000, considerably less than the millions he'd thought he was helping Brooke steal. He left Colorado and never came back. Carl told me later that Tyler had called him crying, begging for another chance. Said he'd made a mistake, that Brooke had seduced him, that he never meant for things to go so far. In construction, your word is everything. Once you break that trust, you're done. Tyler broke the code. Period. I drove out to the lake house that weekend, sat on my grandfather's dock, and watched the sun set over water that would stay in my family for generations to come. The lake was dead calm that night. Made me think about when Dad used to take me fishing up here, teaching me about patience, about building things that last. Cameron Construction not only survived the divorce, it thrived. Without the distraction of a failing marriage and the drain of Tyler's disloyalty, we were firing on all cylinders. We landed 3 major contracts that fall and expanded into commercial development throughout Colorado. The word got around about what had happened. Not the details, but enough for people to know that Derek Cameron wasn't someone you wanted to mess with. Clients respected that. Suppliers respected that. Even my competitors respected that. I brought in a new architect, a young guy named Mike Rodriguez who'd graduated from Colorado State. Hungry, talented, and most importantly, honest. He reminded me of myself when I was starting out. We restructured the partnership agreements too. Learned my lesson about protecting the business from people who might not have its best interests at heart. The restraining order was dropped 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Funny how Brooke wasn't afraid of me anymore once she had her money. The newspaper ran a small follow-up story about the settlement, but nobody paid much attention. Last week's drama is ancient history in a town like Fort Collins. I never remarried. Some guys my age, they bounce right back, find themselves a younger woman, start over. But I learned something about trust that can't be unlearned. Takes a special kind of person to fool you for 18 months while they're planning to destroy your life. Makes you wonder what other people might be capable of. That doesn't mean I became a hermit. I date occasionally, but I'm careful about it. Background checks aren't just for employees anymore. Call me paranoid, but I call it smart business. The lake house became my sanctuary. I spend most weekends up there now, working on projects my grandfather would have appreciated. Built a new workshop, expanded the dock, winterized the guest cabin. Working with my hands again reminds me why I got into construction in the first place. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd been softer, if I'd tried to work things out with Brooke, if I'd believed her lies about needing space to think. I'd probably be bankrupt right now, living in some apartment, watching my life's work get carved up between my ex-wife and my former business partner. Instead, I'm sitting in my own house, mortgage-free, running a company that's worth more now than it was when Brooke tried to steal half of it. The family land is protected for future generations. My grandfather's legacy is intact. Here's what I learned from this whole mess. People will show you who they really are if you pay attention. Brooke showed me she was someone who could lie to my face for 18 months while planning to destroy everything I'd built. Tyler showed me he was someone who could betray a 12-year partnership for the promise of easy money and another man's wife. But Carl showed me he was someone who'd stand by his principles even when it meant going against his own financial interests. Linda showed me she was someone who'd dig for the truth no matter how ugly it got. My employees showed me they were people who'd stick with the company through a messy divorce and come out stronger on the other side. You learn who your real friends are when the chips are down. The construction business taught me that everything starts with a solid foundation. If your foundation is solid, you can build something that lasts for generations. If your foundation is weak, everything you build on top of it will eventually collapse. I thought Brooke and I had built our marriage on a solid foundation. Turns out I was building on quicksand while she was building an escape plan. But the business, the land, the things that really mattered, those foundations were solid as granite. Cameron Construction is still growing. We're working on a mixed-use development project downtown that'll be the biggest thing we've ever tackled. The kind of project I dreamed about when I was starting out with that beat-up Chevy and a toolbox. I hired my foreman's son last month. Kid's 19, fresh out of high school, reminds me of myself at that age. Eager to learn, willing to work, wants to build something that matters. I'm teaching him the same things my dad taught me. Work hard, keep your word, treat people fairly, and never trust anyone who's more interested in what you have than who you are. Some betrayals try to break you. Others make you stronger. The difference is whether you let them define you or whether you use them to build something better. When Brooke walked into that courtroom demanding $14 million of my money, she thought she was taking everything I'd worked for. What she actually did was teach me the most valuable lesson of my life. The only person you can really count on is yourself. But if you build your life right, with honest work and solid foundations, that's enough. I'm Derek Cameron. I'm 49 years old. I built Cameron Construction with my bare hands, and I'll be damned if anyone's going to take it away from me. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed.